So thanks everybody for joining the Kansas City Microsoft 365 user group. I'm from Kansas City, so I'm very excited to be a part of this particular session today, sharing my ABCs with you. The ABCs was my first ever book that I wrote. It has a special place for me, and then just last year I released the second edition of it, all updated for the ever-evolving landscape of SharePoint. So like I said, my name's Nate. I'm from Kansas City. I write books, I blog, a little bit of this and that. You can find me just about anywhere these days. All right, like I mentioned, this was based on a book, second edition. It looks like that in case you find it somewhere. But we have 26 letters to get through, so we're just going to jump right into it. Now, the format of the session is fast-paced, so I just want to encourage if you have any questions, put them in the chat. When we have stopping points or when we get to the end, I'll answer those. But it is hard to get through 26 in just 45 to 50 minutes, so we'll see how it goes. Starting with A. So in the world of SharePoint, A is for accessibility. Now, SharePoint comes with everything out of the box these days, so you don't really have to do a lot of work when it comes to accessibility for SharePoint. We'll talk about when you might want to, but just out of the box, you get immersive reading mode, which is really nice, where let's say you publish a news post, or I'll pull one up here, like KC M365 user group is the best. And at the very top, you've got this option to go to the immersive reader where you can hear this news post read to you. You can change color contrast, or I'll wait for it to load. Yeah, you can play it. Sure is. And in the upper right-hand corner, we can change color contrast, spacing, size. If you're a student, you might be learning parts of speech. That would be great to be able to highlight those. And you can even translate the entire news post to a language of your choice. So lots of cool innovations in that space, all again built in with SharePoint. And just like you heard it reading in the immersive reader there, hopefully maybe noise canceled it. But you can also use screen readers with SharePoint. And then we also have high contrast themes. So you can see when I go to change the look of my site, I can choose one of these high contrast themes to make it a little bit more visible for some. And these are all, again, out of the box, and they've been tested for accessibility. So you know when you are changing your site's theme that you are choosing something that's compliant. All right, and then the last piece is alt text support. We've seen, I think, recent additions in this space where when you're adding images to your site and your news post and your pages, you have the option now to add alternative text to those images so that, again, when someone is using a screen reader and they get to that image, they can hear what's in the image described. All right, B in the world of SharePoint is for business intelligence and dashboards. Now, imagine coming up with something for every letter of the alphabet. It's really hard sometimes to pick one over the other, so I had to get creative as we get through some of these, and I'm sure you'll pick out when we get to the end which ones those might be. But for B, I went with business intelligence and dashboards. So I picked two specific things to share in this presentation when it comes to integrating BI with your sites. And the first is the actual Power BI web part that you can put on a page to let people interact with your dynamic reports in real time. They can filter and slice and dice your reports however they want to. But I wanted to share perhaps a lesser known web part with you here, which is the charts web part. So at the bottom here, you can see I've got two charts on my page, and they are interactive where I'm hovering over it. I'm getting tool tips that tell me specifically what the total data piece is. So it's Monday and it's 29. But if I go into edit, I just wanted to point out that you don't have to be a Power BI expert to be able to build these kinds of simple visualizations to tell your story. Instead, you can use this chart web part, and one of the options is to connect this to a list or library on your site. So notice in this example, we just entered manual data, but I could just say connect to a list or library, choose that list or library, and then you just basically go through this wizard here, choose the specific things that you want to show, and boom, I've connected to a dynamic list on my site, created a chart that's on my page, and it'll update as my list updates. So kind of like light BI, if you will. All right, let's go back to our letters here. In Power BI Web Part again, just a fully integrated report page on your site. Now, BI does have some restrictions sometimes. So for example, if you aren't licensed to use Power BI or don't have access to the published report that's on a page, you're going to run into authentication issues, of course. Whereas that chart web part, you just need access to the list that's supplying that data. All right, on to C. So C is for compliance and governance. This is one of those I had to pair it up to fit everything in that I wanted to. So at the top here, the first 5 items, I kind of put those in the compliance bucket, and the bottom 3 I put in the governance bucket. But for compliance, we're thinking in SharePoint, our data is secure short because it lives in Microsoft 365's universe. We get sensitivity labeling that we can configure. That could be for your entire group that your site lives within. It could be for specific documents, just depends how it's set up. Retention policies, and this kind of ties in with the bottom piece here for data lifecycle management, but retention policies are also something we can configure for all of Microsoft 365 to say, keep this file for this long, 7 years after creation, or we can even do that with groups as well, set up retention policies there. Audit logs, knowing what happened and when or who did a specific action. We get all of that built in as well. We have to do a little bit of configuring to get to the level we want sometimes, but again, out of the box, Microsoft 365 functionality here. And then version control. In SharePoint and OneDrive, you get automatic version control. So every time you're editing your documents, it's auto-saving, it's pushing up new versions, and you and your teammates can revert back at any time. And one of my favorite things about version control in SharePoint specifically is you can actually revert an entire list, or not a list, an entire library back to a specific point in time in case there was catastrophic failure. So let's say someone went in and changed a whole bunch of files because they were told a product was rebranding. The next day they're told, oh, we're not doing that anymore. You can restore everything back to a certain point in time as to what it was yesterday and not have to do it on a file by file basis. Now, on the governance side, we've got user guidelines. These are things that you're probably creating, policies you're writing, training you're providing, adoption you're driving, whatever that is. But you're kind of guiding that governance to the place where it should be. And then we're also thinking, what are our methodologies here? What is our site hierarchy that we're going to implement? Do we have one hub and then a bunch of connected sites? Do we have 3 hubs? Are we separated by department or by geography? All of those kinds of things. And then within those regions or, whatever hierarchy we choose, what are the rules there? Who can do what in those spaces? And then again, data lifecycle management, we're thinking, how long do we keep things mostly? But there's a lot that goes into data lifecycle management that could be its own presentation. So let's keep moving so we can get through them all. D is for document collaboration. So D, documents, SharePoint. A lot of times when I first got started with SharePoint, people said, oh, that's where we just dump all of our documents, right? It kind of felt like an elevated file server or a file share to them. So I kind of took that as a challenge when I first started getting into the space to say, well, it's not just a file dump, right? We can actually go and do all of these amazing things out of the box with no technical background needed. We can manage our own permissions now. We don't have to put in exhaustive service requests to get little things done or to make our site do exactly what we want it to do. We're in charge now, right? We're in the driver's seat. So just a few things when we're thinking about document collaboration in SharePoint. We have real-time co-authoring, where I can open a document, you can open that same document, and you can see what I'm typing in real time. We can have a conversation on a Teams call while we're editing that document. And there's actually a newer feature in Teams calls when you're hitting that share button where we can get on a Word document or an Excel document and edit that together in real time in the meeting without me having to share my screen and you talk me through a revision, right? Or having 2 windows open side by side. It's all integrated now in that Teams meeting using Excel Live or Word Live or whatever they're calling it. And then version history, just like we mentioned for compliance and governance, every single document you're editing has its own version history. Document templates. So I put a screenshot here for this one. If you click on the new button in a library, you'll notice that add template option. Think about the libraries that you have that store things like policies, procedures, maybe press releases, things that are very formulaic where you just fill in sections perhaps. Adding a template to your new menu on a library makes it so easy for people to choose that template and be compliant with your branding guidelines and with your, procedure format. And then when that gets updated, you just update your template in the new menu, right? And people continue to use the most recent version of that template, and they don't have to save a local version of it or worry about storing it on their team site individually, right? They just go to new, choose that template. And then for content approval, again, built into SharePoint, you do have to configure it a little bit to get it to work how you want it to. But I can have something that I want to publish to the entire organization, have that approval step in the middle, and then it's made available. Okay. And we could also get into check-in and check-out and all of that. All right. On to E, thinking about SharePoint experiences. So you can experience SharePoint a number of ways. The most common for me personally is browser access. So I open up my laptop, open a browser, go to SharePoint. You can also experience the SharePoint mobile app, which is really nice on the go. You can access your documents from specific sites. You can read news posts on the fly, and just have that palm access, right? Where you're not looking for the beautiful, rich, responsive pages necessarily, but you're looking maybe more for the content or even just the search experience. And then, of course, we're very familiar with Microsoft Teams these days. We're in a team call right now, and you can access all of your team's files, which live in SharePoint, through a Files tab, right? We're using SharePoint in Teams. We can also pin SharePoint pages as tabs and channels, right? So we don't even have to open a separate browser to be able to benefit from all of the features that we might have put on one page for SharePoint. And then I put kiosk access on here because it's lesser known, but might be helpful for someone out there today, where there's this level of SharePoint kiosk access that you get with the F1, F3 plans. That means that people don't necessarily have to have a mailbox, right? They don't really need the Teams functionality. They just need a place to access some intranet-like features. For example, think about a healthcare setting where you have volunteers. Your volunteers may not need to chat with physicians. They may not need to have their own dedicated email inbox, but they do need a place to learn maybe volunteer orientation topics, to read the latest updates to the volunteer program. Maybe they need a place just to catch up on general hospital news, right? Those kinds of things where they're not needing a personalized experience so much, just maybe a place to go to catch up, right? Or to download a form, perhaps. So for those kiosk users, we also have that experience that's light, that doesn't give them absolutely all of the bells and whistles in Microsoft 365, but just enough. All right, now with Forms integration for F. So Microsoft Forms is a standalone product that you might be familiar with. You can go to forms.office.com and start creating a form right now, and you'll be done in about 2 minutes. It's very simple. I love it, and we're seeing even new list item forms these days in your list where you can customize those using that forms power, right? So instead of just having a single column of values that you can update in a new item form for a SharePoint list, you can make it beautiful, right? And add some of the forms features we love. So we can create forms, but then in SharePoint specifically, we can embed those forms. And like I mentioned, we can also use that forms customization in our list items now. And we can also use data collection through forms, which will store as an Excel file on our site. So for example, if I create a group form in Microsoft Forms, that group form is associated with our group site or our team site, however you want to look at that. So whenever the responses come into that group form, they automatically update an Excel workbook, which is stored on, you guessed it, our SharePoint site, right? So whether you're actually embedding the form experience on a page in SharePoint or you're just using a group form that's connected to a workbook on your site, we can use that forms integration. All right, G is for granular permissions. So again, kind of stretching here because I could have used P for permissions, right? But there's something else for P. So G, granular permissions. With SharePoint, we get role-based access. You get access to what you need when you need it, and this is all determined by human beings, which is where it can get a little hairy sometimes. So out of the box, you have three roles. You have the visitor role, the member role, and the owner role. Visitors are read-only, members are edit, owners are full control. But those of you who've been using SharePoint for a long time or who are just, behind the scenes more these days with it, know that you can do much, much more with these roles than what you appear to at the very beginning. So for example, you could modify the contribute level permission to prevent deletion of items, right? And you can get pretty customized with those. And you can have 25 different levels of permissions on a site instead of just those three: read, edit, and full control. Not recommending that. There are definitely some best practices around there and use cases for it sometimes. But this is where you really need that governance. You need training before people start doing that and locking themselves out of things, perhaps, which definitely happens. But we do get that ability in SharePoint. You can get as fine-tuned as you need to. We can also break permissions on any item. Out of the box, your SharePoint site, as soon as you add members, is kind of like a universal permission where those members can edit everything in the list, everything in the libraries you create. They can edit news posts, create news posts, right? They can have that universal access other than managing the membership of that group. However, you may choose for maybe one library or one list to be locked down to view only. Maybe you're publishing updates to a specific library of official documents or official things that should not be modified under any circumstances. So you can break the permissions on that, say read only for members just on that library while they continue to enjoy the benefits of edit access everywhere else. Okay, and then for external sharing, this of course depends on your organization. They may choose not to allow external sharing whatsoever. But if you do have that enabled, you are able to share not just a file, but an entire site with people outside your organization. And that's one of two ways. It could be external users who use their other organization's credential to access your resources, or it could be guest access, where you create an account for them in your organization as a guest, where they use that to authenticate to get in. And then with all of this, there's a lot behind the scenes that you have to consider and think about, including do we require these users to set up multi-factor authentication if they're a guest user? Do we have conditional access policies where they have to be on a compliant device or they have to be in a certain geographic region? So we can set up all of that through a combination of Azure and SharePoint. It's a whole family of products that we have to use to make sure that people can access what they need when they need to. Now, hub sites. We talked about hierarchies earlier when we're thinking about governance. Like what is our methodology? Do we have one that connects to 7? Do we have 3 that connect to 4 each? So hub sites specifically, if we dive a little bit deeper into that one, allow us that ability to create that structure I'm talking about, where we have kind of that umbrella at the very top, and then how do we break it up? So a small hub example might be something like human resources is the hub. And connected to that human resources site, we have sites like benefits, maybe onboarding or new employees, recruitment, retention. There's several different ways HR might be divided. So that could be one hub structure. Maybe more common that applies to organizations of all sizes might just be your intranet. Your intranet is the hub, and then connected to that is one site for HR, one site for IT, one site for accounting, so on and so forth. So anyway, that's kind of the idea here. But you decide that internally. Of course, you'll figure out, how many sites do we need to, contain the content, but also where does the permission boundary come across? Like in the HR example, in a larger organization, your HR director and maybe 1 or 2 other people may own the hub, the top level of that HR hub. And then you may break permissions, right? So that the benefits coordinator can be the owner of the benefits site. And that's where this hub structure might really come in handy for you is rather than breaking inheritance a dozen times on one site, you create multiple sites, give people that access to completely control one area of the hub structure as opposed to trying to manipulate one to this very granular level. Um, so with these hub sites, we get lots of benefits like branding and theme inheritance, where if on that HR example, they change their theme to a high contrast yellow and black example like you saw me share earlier, that will trickle down to all connected sites. So you get the branding inheritance, but you also get the navigation inheritance, where here I've got an example of this I can show you somewhere. There we go. So at the very top of this site called the landing, we can see there's another navigation menu. This is your hub navigation menu. So anything you've got connected to this hub, generally you would put a link to up here. So maybe this says human resources, this would say benefits, this would say recruitment and retention, so on and so forth across the top. And then when you're jumping from one site to the next, this menu, this hub navigation menu, stays the same. So people can easily navigate your entire hub structure without having to hit the back button or use the search bar to move around. And then below the hub nav, it may be here or it may be here on the left side. That's just your traditional site nav. So it's independent. It can be unique to this one part of the hub structure, whereas again, that hub nav will stay the same. All right, so that's inherited. And then we also get the feature for hub structures of content rollups, where events, news, and documents can all roll up from those connected sites to the hub. So for example, again, in our HR site, let's say the benefits coordinator publishes a news post about the upcoming deadline to enroll. That news post would then have the option to be consumed by the parent site. So the main human resources site can say, I want to curate news from benefits, recruitment and retention, but then they could also even say, I want to pull news from this completely other site outside of our hub and show that on our page. Maybe that's something like professional development. Maybe that lives in the education department, but they want to pull that into their HR site as well. So those of you who've used SharePoint a lot probably know that I'm talking about the highlighted content web part right now. That's my favorite web part of all. In fact, I think that was H in the first edition of this book, but I had to let it go. So here's content rollups anyway. And that's usually highlighted content for me. But even the events web part and the news web part have the ability to do that kind of hub connection. All right, and then search. When you're building hub structures, your search can be specific to that hub then, which is nice, where I can search on the human resources hub and it searches all connected sites. Now, search is a deep topic. Again, that's another one that could be its own presentation where we talk about building custom acronyms and locations and Q&A and bookmarks and all of that. But just know that when you're in SharePoint, search is usually contextual. You'll be on one site, you use that search bar, it might search that one site. If you're on your home site, however, it'll search all sites. So you have to kind of have an awareness of where you are before you search, or pick up on some context clues to understand, am I searching just the hub or everything right now? Or just this one site sometimes, or just this one library. All right, so just a visual here for those of you who are new to hub sites. This is from Microsoft's official documentation, and I think it does a really good job of highlighting one more big win here for hub sites, which is when organizations restructure. For example, what if that talent or professional development site or department, more likely, was consumed by HR? What if the education department was being rolled up into HR? Then in this situation, you can see how some sites like Watch the Green and Blue here are moving from one of the orange hubs to a different one easily. And that's really in reality how it works is you would just say, okay, well, we'll just take that education site and associate it to a different hub. And the nice thing about this, which is so much better than it used to be, is it doesn't break any URLs because the site path, since we're going for a flat structure these days, doesn't change. It'll still say sites/education or sites/professional development. And it's just in the back end connected to HR. Nothing else changes. All right, I is for intranet personalization. We can't really talk about SharePoint without talking about intranets. So for intranets, we want to make experiences really. We're creating a website-like experience when we're thinking about our SharePoint intranet. And on this intranet, we have the capability to create personalized content. A lot of the web parts you configure are going to have options like relevant to the current user or recommended for the current user, which is just built by the algorithm. But you can also do things like audience targeting, where you use groups to specify, like, for example, on a quick links web part you could say, well, I want anybody who's a manager to see this link to do this from our intranet homepage. But a non-manager can't even use that, so I don't want to show it there and then get access issues and all that, right? So use audience targeting when it makes sense to further customize or personalize that intranet experience and make sure people have visibility into things that are relevant for them based on their group membership. And then each individual using SharePoint or your intranet, however you want to look at it, can follow content. You've probably seen the stars everywhere through SharePoint. It's full of stars. And those stars are just favorites. And so you can follow a site just by clicking on that star. And then on your left SharePoint, here, I'll show you this, but you have a left SharePoint app. What do they call it? App something. Is it just the app bar? But anyway, this thing here will save all of your favorited news, your favorited files, your sites. So you can see down here, I've got my followed sites, but pretty easy to use, right? And then I'll show you the star too, just right over here. If I want to follow the product support site, I click the star, I'm done. So pretty easy. The other nice place that shows up is on your actual SharePoint homepage here, unless you've modified this. But you'll have your following on the left, and then you also have your frequent here, and you can see the stars once again, where I can choose to star maybe my intranet homepage. So anyway, just again, quick bookmarking per individual. Okay, and then quick links. These are things where, again, you want to kind of tailor that experience to whoever the audience is. So let's think beyond just your intranet homepage and think about the IT support page. On that page, when someone goes there, what are they expecting to do? So we want to use the quick links web part to say, all right, most people come to our site to fill out this request or to review this procedure. Those kinds of things. And that's how we personalize basically the experience there, maybe pairing with audience targeting to say, welcome to IT, here's your experience or your capabilities here. And then for dynamic pages, you've seen an example of the chart web part, right? That can be updated automatically by a list or a library on your site. Just think about using some of those web parts in more dynamic ways, right? Where we can embed forms experiences or we can embed Power Apps or Power BI to make it not just text on a page or not just a document dump like, early SharePoint, may have sounded like to some people. But now we have all these really interactive pieces. How do we use that to make our intranet an experience and not just a record? All right, Jay, another creative one here. Junctions of discovery with Viva Topics. All right, so we all know what happened to Viva Topics, I'm sure by now. It's gone, so this is kind of a, a moot topic. It's being swallowed by other efforts. But I'll go ahead and talk about it, and then yes, I'll write a third edition in 4 years. So for now, Viva Topics used to give you content insights. You know, it would pull information from throughout Microsoft 365 and give you Wikipedia-like cards that kind of summarized it for you automatically, or you could curate those to help people get up to speed on acronyms or just topics that are being discussed throughout the org. It's not gone. The idea is there. The features will likely bubble back up through other avenues, but for now, Viva Topics as an idea is no more. All right, knowledge sharing with Viva Connections. Let's stay in the Viva space. This one is very much still here, so we don't have to worry about losing this one anytime soon. Viva Connections does allow you to create a Viva-like experience in Microsoft Teams that can basically be your intranet portal if you want it to be. So we get the news roll-ups from your entire intranet if you want. You can have recommended features for the current user who's looking at Viva Connections. But basically, I'll see if I can pull up an example to show you. I think I've got it set up on this tenant. Anyway, I'll talk while it's loading. There is a way where Viva Connections can basically just be a click away in Microsoft Teams for all of your users. You can customize the icon so it's your company logo, but you can kind of train users instead of having to open up a whole different browser and go find your intranet to just click on this icon for your company, in this case called the landing, in the upper left-hand corner, which again, you configure, you choose the icon, you publish this to all users or specific users if you wish. And you can even choose which order it's on using a Teams app policy. Here we go, and I'll click Get Started. But you can see this is rolling up something you might have recognized from the landing when I was in the browser. Some of our news here, we've got dashboard items, which you can configure in SharePoint. You don't have to do it here. But you can promote certain learning, promote certain apps from Teams like praise, and then tasks could be coming from a number of places. But then the SharePoint integration really is up here in the upper right, where I can click on this icon to take me to the landing. And then I've also got this left nav, which could alternatively take me into the other Viva apps. So it's kind of like a weird mix right now, to be honest. I'm not sure I'm the biggest fan of this intermediate step, but you can customize it. But out of the box, it's kind of like this. You click on your site icon, and the nice thing about it is it brings that SharePoint experience fully into Teams, where notice I still can click just one click away into my chat, my activity, my Teams, but I can use the full SharePoint site, and I can even navigate through it. So if I want to go and look at this, well, that was a bad example because that's an external news source. But here, let's go to the internal one. Here we go. I open up a news post. Notice I stay in Teams. I still have my nav, and I can read, catch up, submit forms, use Power BI reports, do all of that, right? And then go right back to work over here. All right, so that's kind of the idea, right? Viva Connections brings these two worlds together, including more from Viva outside of Teams into SharePoint to give us that personalized experience, to keep us in Teams where we can go right back to work, give us the news that we need when we need it, and it's very mobile friendly. So you'll notice if you have the Teams mobile app, Viva Connections is there too. Looks great, works great. All right, list reinvented. We've seen a lot of change in lists since the first edition of this book, so I wanted to call it List Reinvented because there's a lot that it offers now. When I first wrote the book, List was just a part of SharePoint. It wasn't a standalone app. Now List is a standalone app, and you can have personal lists that are stored on your OneDrive, which is a SharePoint site. But it's your SharePoint site, right? But you can have your private list and share those with nobody or share them with one or a few other people. And you get all of the benefits of a list without having to have an entire group behind it or an entire site that's shared with 6 other people, right? It's yours now. You can still, of course, create SharePoint lists that are shared with everybody in the site where everybody can contribute and work on that together. But essentially lists are still the same, where they provide that structured data place where you can create different column types. They can be choice, they can be free text, they can connect to Entra ID to give you person columns. And then based on those column types, you can use the filtering abilities to find just items assigned to you. You can sort based on due date and create multiple views on those to be able to switch between different views of your data in a report-like experience. And then one of my favorite things to tell people about views, if you're using list or new to list, is whenever you do create a view, which is just like a saved filter or a saved sorted experience of your list data, that view has a unique URL. So you can pair list with the quick links web part to create easy jumping points to specific reports, if you will, of your data. So for example, you might want to create a view that says assigned to me, and you filter your list based on whenever assigned to is equal to @me. Or if you're in Classic, it's the me in brackets. But anyway, you can do that, copy that view's URL, put it on a quick link, and then people from your homepage of your site can just click on that link, go straight to their items in that list without really having to understand views very much. Of course, you want to train them on views so they can switch from assigned to me to any number of other options, like those that are urgent, those that are for a specific geographical region. But that's kind of the idea, right? Create those experiences of your list data. And then the other piece is Power Automate, really, where we're thinking about when I create a list item, what can happen next? And truly, the potential is endless. I put workflows down there, but really I'm thinking Power Automate, where I create a new item, and then Power Automate says, oh, there's something new. And then we can start an approval process. We can create documents based on templates. We can copy items based on certain conditions. We can send email notifications, Teams chats. Truly, truly endless possibilities when we pair Power Automate with our list. But our list become kind of that foundation of any kind of automation we'd want to do. Now, we could get into Dataverse as well, which would probably be better for those more scalable, large solutions. But for getting started for smaller solutions or quick needs, lists is first cheaper, and then two, easy to do. So M, we're halfway there. Microsoft Teams integration. So we've already talked about Viva Connections. We're thinking a little bit different on this one, where Teams really is that front door. And we can experience, like you saw, SharePoint through Teams, where we can interact with the full site, but we also have files, right? Now, in case this is a new concept for anybody, there are no files that are actually stored in Microsoft Teams. If you upload a file to a chat with me, and it's just you and me in a chat, that file goes to your OneDrive and it's automatically shared with me. So that's what's kind of happening behind the scenes. If we're in a group chat, so you, me, and Bob, if you uploaded a chat there, or sorry, a file there, same thing, uploads it to your OneDrive, shares it with me and Bob. No difference there. Whoever uploads the file goes to their OneDrive into a folder. You can see in red there at the bottom, Microsoft Teams chat files, shares with recipients. Now, the team side of that, we're not thinking about chats at all. Doesn't matter if it's individual or group, we're thinking different. Specifically on channels within Teams, we can have conversations. And each of those channels in your team has its own folder in that SharePoint site behind the scenes. So if you look right here, we've got site/name of the team /name of the library, which your default is always called shared documents, /name of the channel /folder, right? So general, channel one. And then the private example here is interesting because if you do create a private channel in a team, which has unique permissions from the rest of the team, it does have to create a completely separate SharePoint site. But once again, it follows the same structure of the default document library /channel name. There's one more channel type you're probably thinking of. It's shared. It's very similar. You create a shared channel. It'll create a separate site for that, and then same structure. So anyway, all that to say, any file work you're doing in Microsoft Teams usually goes to SharePoint or OneDrive. Right. Well, I shouldn't say usually, always goes to SharePoint or OneDrive. But Microsoft Teams kind of becomes that hub, right? That central front door where you don't have to remember which site that was in, right? You just kind of get used to your team navigation and your channel navigation. And then, you just have to remember the files tab, which is consistent across all of your channels. It really makes it easier for people because if you think about it, each of your SharePoint sites can be customized completely. You can hide the link to the document library, you can embed a web part experience of it, or send people the direct link to the full library, which has a few different options, right? So people get disoriented and all of this context switching when they go from your site to my site and they're completely different. Teams offers that consistency, right? Where they, are used to working with files, but now we're also making the way that they access those or the path to get to those consistent as well. So it's a huge user adoption win powered by SharePoint. All right, and same thing here with Microsoft Teams. We can go beyond just documents and chats and conversations. We can integrate other apps, and those other apps may also have SharePoint implications. For example, when you're in a meeting and you use the whiteboard app, that whiteboard is saved. Guess where? SharePoint, right? Or if you're in a personal meeting, OneDrive. All right, on to news and pages. N is for Nate. I mean news and pages. So for news, you've already seen an example where I showed you the immersive reader for the KC M365 user group is the best page. But these news and pages have really evolved as well. So I want to show you really quickly. If we go to my landing homepage, oh, and Megan doesn't own that one. Let's try this one. Nope. Let's see, which one does she own? None of these. That's okay. I'll just talk you through it. So anyway, since we don't have a lot of time, when you do click new and then choose news post, you have different kinds of templates these days. You may remember, if you haven't created news in a while, that you could always, basically create a page and that's all it was. And you could do layouts and you could add web parts. That's the idea. But they released new kinds of templates somewhat recently. I want to say the last year or so, that are email templates. And all that means is you get fewer web part options, but all of the web part options that you get on the email ready templates are optimized for email, right? Like you want to be able to put a video into an email, right? Or maybe an embedded Power BI report when it really makes sense in an email context. So you get fewer options, but when you're finished creating that news in an email ready template and send it out as an email, it's fully responsive. It's beautiful. It looks great on all devices. And it's still a SharePoint news post at the end of the day. People can still navigate your site and see it just like they would any other news post. They can still search for it and find all the content within it. And they can consume it on a number of devices, and it's fully responsive and beautiful, just like regular SharePoint news. And the difference is just that email inbox recipient experience where they don't have to click a link to read the news post. They can just view it all right there in the email. All right, O is for OneDrive integration. You've already seen a little bit of OneDrive, right? OneDrive is your space, whereas SharePoint is our space. So whenever you are uploading files to your OneDrive or syncing your OneDrive, everything's private to you until you choose to share it with other people. You can share one file, you can share an entire folder of files, but you're in charge. You are the owner of your OneDrive SharePoint site. And once again, OneDrive is built on SharePoint, so it's just like your personal SharePoint site. Now, you don't get all the bells and whistles you're used to. For example, you can't create news on your OneDrive, and you can't do some of the advanced apps or fun things we can do with SharePoint. It's mostly files, right? But again, it's yours. You're the owner. You're in charge at all times. And you still get that version control. And just like in SharePoint, you can roll your entire OneDrive back to a certain point in time if you had some kind of issue there. All right, P is for process automation. Remember, I had to make a choice between permissions and this. It was a tough one, but I went with P for process automation. I love working in the Power Platform these days. It's honestly where I spend most of my time, I'd say. Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI. But when I'm talking about process automation in a SharePoint context, it's always Power Automate. Right, so right inside of all of your lists and libraries, you're going to notice a few different options. First, you'll see there's automate, and right next to it, you'll see there's integrate. Not confusing at all. So you click on automate, you might see set a reminder, and I say might because that would necessitate that one of your columns in your list or library has a date column, and that's what that reminder would be based on. So for example, if you had a list of your products and their launch dates, you could set a reminder based on the launch date column, maybe 7 days prior, and it would email you or whatever you want it to do. But essentially, all that set a reminder option does on the automate menu is creates a Power Automate workflow on the back end. Okay, so it's kind of doing the work for you. It's a template, essentially. Rules are a little bit different. They're a very light way to introduce automation to your processes. So for example, I could create a rule that says whenever a column value changes from started to finished, send me an email, right? Or send the person it's assigned to an email. But your options are extremely light there. You cannot customize the notification very much, but it does the job, right? If you just need a simple notification, a little nudge now and then for specific scenarios, you might get by with just rules and no Power Automate experience. Now, the other option, if you go to integrate, that's where you're going to see Power Automate, and you'll be able to create a whole flow. You can manage your existing flows. You can use templates in case you're kind of newer to Power Automate, but that would be kind of the more advanced approach to introducing process automation for your lists and libraries, whereas the automate menu options are more beginner friendly. All right. So Q is for quick links and navigation. You can tell I like quick links. I think this is the third letter I've mentioned them in. But quick links really do allow your users to have an easier navigation experience because you're promoting content essentially. You're saying these are the most important things you can find on our page, or these are the most frequently requested resources we have to offer. And then navigation, of course, kind of does the same, right? But we want to be really intentional about these and not create 32 quick links and have a navigation menu with 300 links. So there's a balance you have to find. Now, what you're seeing a screenshot here of is the quick links web part where you can make it kind of robust. You can have an icon with a title and a description, and it looks really beautiful and professional. Whereas you can also just do a really simple icon and title all the way down, right? You don't have to do the description. For me, if your title isn't clear enough about what exactly you could do there, I think the description is really helpful. For example, if employees and workplaces, that's great. I just noticed that. If employees and workplaces, I assume, or workspaces, it could be either one. But if that was just by itself with no description, I might wonder, is that like Active Directory? I'm sorry, Entra ID, or is that maybe just our org chart? I wouldn't really know. So this tells me it's actually the latest on precautionary measures and more. Oh, okay, not quite what I was thinking. So just look at all of your quick links that you have and see, does this maybe need a little more context to be understood, or is it good by itself? And you can see this one takes a 2-column layout. It's probably in the center of the page somewhere, whereas a lot of quick links are sometimes on that right 1/3 column or even in the vertical column all the way up and down a page. So again, it just kind of depends what you're trying to promote and what priority it has over other content on your page. But try to keep it short. Quick links, I don't like to see more than 10 to 12 because otherwise I feel like I'm reading a novel sometimes. And then for custom navigation, think big buckets. We could, of course, put 35 links up there on our navigation menus in our sites. But what are the big buckets? And then if I can go to, let's go back to our HR example, where I'm on the HR site and I click the benefits link from my hub nav. When I go to the benefits site, that's when I expect to see links related to benefits. But if we put all of the benefits links also on the top level hub site, it gets really muddy really fast, right? Because as soon as benefits is up there, then recruitment and retention wants to come up too. And then what's the point of having the hub structure at all? So we need to have kind of a methodology or like an approach to our navigation as we go through, hub structures in the intranet or even just your one site with pages. All right, R is for recycle bin management. Oops, other way. So with your recycle bin, of course, you can delete items from lists, you can delete files from libraries, you can delete pages, you can delete sites, right? Lots of deletion possibilities if you're really into it. But you can also restore these items. The key there with lists and libraries is you can restore items within 93 days. After 93 days, items that are in your recycle bin are permanently deleted. Now, there's another feature of your recycle bin where you have a second stage recycle bin. So for example, let's say I delete 25 documents from our site's library. They go to the first recycle bin, or the one that most people see, right? And then if I empty that recycle bin within that 93-day window, or if I go into the recycle bin and manually select certain files that I deleted and choose to double delete them, they go to the second stage recycle bin, which is only accessible by site owners. So at that point, if I made a mistake after double deleting or emptying the first recycle bin, my site owner is going to have to go into the second stage recycle bin and get that for me. So for those of you who just learned something new, let me show you where that lives. I'm going to come out here to my, whoops, oh, I'm in Teams. That's why it's all weird. Threw myself off. All right, so I'm going to go to my site contents. And some of you will have recycle bin on your navigation by default. So I'm just going to go to site contents where it's always going to be in case you don't have it on your nav. And then you can go to recycle bin. And at the very bottom of your recycle bin, under the cat image, if it's empty, and Megan's not an owner, so she's not seeing it, but you'll look right here in the lower left corner under the cat, if it's empty, and you'll see can't find what you're looking for, second stage recycle bin, and you'll click on that link, and that'll take you to basically an exact copy of this. It looks identical, but you're in the second stage. And that's where your site owner can then restore items back to the original location. They don't come back to the first recycle bin, they'll go right back to where they were originally deleted from. All right, so yeah, 2 recycle bins, 93 days. It doesn't matter if you empty the recycle bin during those 93 days. They just continue the counter in the second stage. They don't restart. All right, for S, we have site types and templates. So there are 2 site types right now. There's communication and team sites. Communication sites are more the traditional intranet feeling where we're communicating, pushing news out, providing resources. Templates, however, are how we dress up sites. So it's a little bit different where it's not an intention of the site, but it's how we want it to look and feel. So yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention team sites. So communication sites, intranet, team sites, collaboration more, where we're actually working and doing stuff there. So when we're thinking about the templates, I put a screenshot there in the circle, but you can choose from a number of built-in templates for your site if it has a specific purpose, where it'll design your page a certain way. It'll give you certain web parts that might go really well with, for example, project managers. So you don't have to build everything from scratch. And in fact, you should also look at lookbook.microsoft.com because in addition to the templates you can just use from SharePoint, you can also deploy directly from lookbook.microsoft.com to provision entire sites if you have an admin role. So let me show you the non-admin thing here. If you just have a site, oh, once again, she's not an owner. Let's see if she can do it. I don't think she can. Wait, oh, maybe she can. Yeah, okay. So Megan just went up to her settings wheel, went to apply a site template. This is the screenshot you saw where you can choose a specific site template. Let's say new employee onboarding. Again, very specific scenarios here. But when you're looking at these templates, notice it tells you this comes with a home page and 5 additional pages, a page template, a list, and it's enhanced with Stream or the video player for SharePoint. Right, and I can scroll, I can see what that home page is going to look like and decide if this is the starting place that I would like to have. Something to be aware of when you do use these templates is you may not want everything it comes with. So be sure to go back in later and clean out all of the extra stuff that you decide not to use so it's not floating out there in search results and confusing users who might be digging into your site contents. All right, so again, site types, communication and team, site templates, what's the function of the site? T is for task management with lists and planner. So with lists, of course, you can create columns like we talked about. You can introduce automation to do reminders and all of that. Planner, however, which we're hearing more and more about as it consumes the task ecosystem of Microsoft 365, is super valuable for those of you who just need a quick and ready tool that you don't have to build from scratch, right? With lists, you do have to define all of the columns, you have to maintain it, change it over time, and it's highly customizable, which is great. But just for those routine project management needs or just maybe annual events that you organize or processes you go through, Planner can suffice. And it sorts all of your tasks into a Kanban format. And with all the evolution we're seeing in Planner, now we're seeing some project functionality and waterfalls, or Gantt charts, all sorts of things that we didn't have before with Planner that might make it your tool of choice over list these days. U is for unified search experience. I talked a little bit about search earlier, where it's very contextual, right? And you have to kind of look around to figure out, am I searching the hub, one site, just a library, or everything? So what I like to recommend to people when they're trying to find something they're having a hard time is to just go to office.com or microsoft365.com. They're the same thing. And then when you search from that search bar at the top, that includes all of the SharePoint sites you have access to. It includes your OneDrive. It includes all of your messages you've sent in Teams or received in Teams, all of your emails as well. So you don't have to first go to Outlook and wonder if they sent you a file there and then go to Teams and search and maybe it was in a chat, right? Just go to one place. Go to the unified search on office.com or microsoft365.com and search absolutely everything you have access to at once. When you do that, you're going to see some familiar things like filters where you can say, I know it was a Word doc, right? Or I know it was a message from this person, those kinds of things. And your admins can choose to customize results where you can create unique search verticals where you search your public website perhaps as well with that one search bar. and you can promote results and create bookmarks and Q&A results and location. It's endless again. But I think search is a really cool topic, and I'd encourage you to dig into it if you're interested. But yes, out of the box, office.com, Microsoft365.com. One more Viva. I chose Viva Engage in Communities. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure everybody does by now in this group especially, but Viva Engage is the new Yammer, or Yammer was rebranded, however you want to look at that. But you still can create communities and you still have these discussions, and it helps to erase some of those lines we may have previously experienced between certain groups of people. For example, an example we hear a lot is leadership, right? We want to have conversations with leadership, but my IT team doesn't really have a direct line to leadership. Or, all of our collaborative efforts kind of keep us in these buckets. So we could, of course, have an org-wide team. We could create an intranet where maybe we embed a Viva Engage web part, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here. But there's also just Viva Engage standalone, former Yammer, right? Where we could just go there and have this social media-like experience where we have a leadership connection and we can ask direct questions and engage with people across department lines that we normally wouldn't in certain ways, such as, new parents or pet owners or, whatever it may be. Now, in SharePoint specifically, when we're pulling in that kind of Viva Engage experience, there is a Viva Engage web part. I think it's called Conversations. But oh yeah, it says right here at the top. Got my little window in the way. But look for the Conversations web part that's powered by Viva Engage. And you can choose to bring in conversations from, as you can see, communities, specific users, topics, or just the home feed. And this may be, of course, unique to each individual, so just keep that in mind. But, oops, went too far. You can also filter those, show who published it, and change how it displays on your page. But the idea is on your intranet or even on your department site, you're able to create that space for discussions and to, again, blur some of the lines that may have existed otherwise. All right, W is for web parts. We've already talked a lot about web parts. My favorite is screenshotted here. It's the highlighted content web part. We're looking at the configuration pane for it, where you can choose to roll up content from a number of places, maybe just your site, maybe all sites, but it can be documents, it can be files, pages, really, anything that you have. Can be pulled in with a filter query to say modified in the last week or created by this one person, includes these keywords. It's just very versatile, so that's why I like it a lot. But anyway, these web parts allow you to create those dynamic pages we talked about having to make things more interactive, to make this a place that we want to go and have an experience rather than just read a record. And it's just truly endless. It gives us this blank canvas where each page can have one web part or 25 web parts, right? But you get to get creative with it and create an identity for your department or for your task. X is for extensibility. I know, a stretch. Everybody's waiting on this one, I'm sure. They're like, what did he come up with for X? But extensibility with SharePoint framework. Those of you who do want to take SharePoint out of the box, right, and then add additional functionality to it, should probably get familiar with the SharePoint framework, where you can develop custom solutions using a supported framework that's still going to be responsive and provide the SharePoint experience we know and love, right? We're not thinking HTML or CSS. We're still within the Microsoft realm, but it does take a little bit of work. It's a learning curve to get into it, but then you can have that perfectly refined web part that you want, right? That the way that you want it to function, the way that you need it to look, and all of that. Y is your learning portal with another V, Viva Learning. So Viva Learning is just a way to have a learning portal in your organization. It could be your knowledge base. It could be more of an LMS if you want it to be. You can configure it in a number of ways where you can infuse your own learning material into it, or just use stuff out of the box from learn.microsoft.com and LinkedIn Learning. But that's kind of up to your administrators, and that might be you. But in SharePoint, really what I would recommend is probably using the Viva Learning app in Teams and then bringing in SharePoint content. So SharePoint is kind of the reverse partner in this scenario, where you create the content out there, it's the videos, it's the text, on pages, and then you put that into Viva Learning, and that gives you that familiar SharePoint experience as you go through your LMS content or your just simply Viva Learning content. All right, and finally, with minutes to spare, we have Z, zooming out to view SharePoint's role in Microsoft 365. So we've covered a lot, in 1 hour to talk about 26 topics that SharePoint kind of encompasses, but we've barely scratched the surface. And each one of these letters can be its own presentation. In fact, I would encourage you to look at the list of 26 letters and create a user group in your organization and say this week or this month, don't do it every week, I think people would burn out. But this month we're going to talk about A, accessibility for SharePoint. Next month we're going to talk about B, right? I just gave you 26 topics that you can get deeper on, learn more about, share with one another, and really grow as a team. But anyway, as we zoom out and we think about SharePoint's overall role, we see SharePoint powering so much. SharePoint powers team collaborative efforts where we're getting our documents stored there. We're seeing our whiteboards, our meeting recordings, our transcriptions, literally everything goes to SharePoint, including OneDrive. OneDrive is built on SharePoint. Look at your URL. When you're in your browser looking at your OneDrive, it says SharePoint, but that's your space. A planner and project for the web, or I guess I could just say planner now. The city's task centers, right? Where when we think about that SharePoint ecosystem, whenever you're attaching planner tasks, or sorry, files to your planner tasks, those are stored in that planner group's SharePoint site, right? They're still connected. And we can embed those planner plans on our SharePoint pages. So a lot of connection there. Viva Engage, we see a lot of back and forth, like why do we need SharePoint if we have Viva Engage? Why do we need Viva if we have SharePoint? And then throw Teams into it and it gets even more fun. But I like to think, what does Viva Engage have to offer our existing experiences where we could just use the best of everything, right? And to me, it's that conversations web part where our intranet suddenly has a discussion forum, a board on it where we can go and actually have real-time, Q&A with leaders. And then Microsoft Forms, anything people attach to your forms, if you have the upload question type, will be saved in a SharePoint site if it's a group form. And like we talked about, you can embed those forms experiences. And then same with Power BI, embed your reports. And Stream is kind of like your video powerhouse of SharePoint these days, powering all of the video experiences you hear a lot about, like your transcription and being able to use AI to detect faces and all of that. But really exciting developments we're still seeing in the Stream space, so keep an eye there. Whew. All right, we made it through 26 letters. Final resources for you here. These are some of my favorites, and I'm sure you've heard a lot through this group that have been shared. But blogs.office.com is a great resource to, of course, stay up to date, but I use it differently in the SharePoint world where you can find an article from blogs.office.com, post it as a news link. So when you go to your homepage, click on new, but choose news link, paste that article, and then it looks like real news on your site. Uses their big banner images, pulls in the description and title automatically, but it's a quick way to create content that you don't otherwise have time for all the time. And then roadmap.office.com is a really great resource for those of you who are wanting to stay on the cutting edge and be the first person to tell your colleagues that, hey, did you know Planner's consolidating this and that and going to be introducing Gantt charts soon? It can be fun. It can also be stressful. So go to roadmap.office.com. You can filter by product. You can filter by your cloud instance if you're government or a DoD. But anyway, you can stay on that cutting edge, be that person on your team that gets people excited about change. And then events, you're at one right now. Thanks for coming. And you can find so many more at communitydays.org that are usually more like virtual conferences or in-person Saturday events, like we used to have SharePoint Saturdays. You'll find those kinds of things at communitydays.org. All right, if you liked the 26 letters or you want a copy of the book, I've put a QR code up there on the screen. You can also go to that short Amazon link that I won't read to you. But I do want to thank you all for your time going through my ABCs. You can find me online with also links to the book in case you missed it there at natechamberlain.com.